I used to know a girl. She had a dozen guys. One of them found out about it, beat her up so bad she ended up in a hospital on Guerrero Street.
What a story, Mark.
Yeah, you can say that again.
When no one understands you, or the little things you do, when destiny, she strands you, or wears you like a shoe.
As I watched The Disaster Artist, I had a nagging feeling of deja vu, as if I'd seen something in James Franco's performance as Tommy Wiseau somewhere before. I had seen The Room and listened to a couple of interviews with Wiseau, so I was a little familiar with his odd accent, cadence, and, shall we say, unique vernacular, but I didn't find him familiar until I saw Franco's interpretation of Wiseau out in the world, interacting with people, trying to succeed at the dream he'd never allowed himself to fully pursue before. It didn't hit me until I saw the different colors of the man, or at least the colors Franco painted with his interpretation. But that interpretation is based on a book written by Greg Sestero, Wiseau's best friend, and probably the man who spent more time with Tommy than anyone else on the planet, who had cassette tapes of Wiseau expressing himself alone in his most private moments. True, Tommy Wiseau is claiming the book all about the making of his baffling yet undeniably entertaining indie cult film The Room is only 40% accurate to what really happened. But then he said Franco's movie is 99.9% accurate, even though it's based on the same material, at least in capturing his essence, as Jimmy Kimmel posed the question to Wiseau on his talk show. So while I realize my initial basis for what I suddenly recognized in Tommy Wiseau is another man's performance, I imagine a number of personality and behavioral traits I latched onto are similar to those of the genuine article. And whatever his motivations, Wiseau himself claims Franco, who's getting Oscar buzz for his performance, got really, really close. And as I've continued to read about Tommy Wiseau and listen to him speak, I just can't shake the uncanny resemblance, in personality anyway, to one of my favorite fictional oddball characters. Tommy Wiseau is the closest thing I have ever seen to a real-life version of The Tick. Now, while Wiseau is often thought of as a peculiar guy, an out-of-touch guy, and a brash, audacious guy with no shame who will do anything in front of anyone short of telling you where he originally comes from, he's obviously not on the same level of weirdness and reckless abandon as the Tick, although I wonder what Wiseau would do with the gift of nigh invulnerability. Wiseau doesn't fancy himself a crime fighter and protector of the innocent, but he does have precisely the same sense of naivety, delusion of grandeur, and laser-focused drive and determination about his own passion. Despite their counterintuitive approaches to their respective crafts, both the Tick and Tommy Wiseau believe they will succeed because of how badly they want to succeed. They both believe it's their destiny. That's at least certainly where the Disaster Artist version of Wiseau is coming from when he throws caution and common sense to the wind and convinces Greg to go with him to Hollywood, as though someone is waiting for them there with a standard rich and famous contract, declaring that the whole town is theirs for the taking. Obviously, the realities for each person or character are different. The Tick succeeds at being a superhero because he's really strong, can't be hurt, has a sidekick with brains, and his name's in the title. And Wiseau succeeds despite himself because his movie, which he intended as a serious drama about the consequences of manipulating people for your own ends, and hoped maybe it would be a contender for an Oscar, has gained the status as a beloved cult film because it works as a hysterical dark comedy. The Tick is, at least physically, a natural-born superhero. Wiseau is not a natural-born lead actor in a romantic drama, or a natural-born screenwriter, or a natural-born director. He is not. He is naturally entertaining, however, to the degree that the Tick is naturally nigh invulnerable. And they both, I think, achieve greatness in their way because of their unwavering optimism. They both inherently believe the world, and in Wiseau's case, America specifically, is ultimately just and fair and will give them what they want if they put in the work. Wiseau frequently says, you just have to be the best, and you just have to do something original. And for the Tick, it's that he's a good guy, and he's always fighting the bad guys. They both have a childlike view of the world to some extent, and they seem unaware of many of the harsh realities of life. Wiseau doesn't go as far as Tick does in some versions. His main character in The Room, Johnny, commits suicide in his film, so he probably understands that everybody dies, which is a concept that Tick struggles with in the Patrick Warburton series. But Wiseau doesn't realize, at first, how harsh and nigh impenetrable Hollywood is for outsiders. He expects corporate movie making to be all about art in the same way the Tick expects the justice system to be all about justice. While Wiseau might appreciate the hard truth about death, it's not just for dead people, as he likely dealt with it in his mysterious and clouded past, he operates as though he is unchanging and will never expire himself. He refuses to give his age to his closest friend or to the public and claims he was the same age as Greg when he made The Room, while all the evidence, just looking at him, and immigration papers Sestero claims he's seen that would prove Wiseau was born in the 1950s, make that an extraordinary and unlikely claim. He refuses to say exactly where he comes from, claiming to be from New Orleans, despite a strange accent with more than a hint of French influences, and despite his penchant for leaving out article adjectives when he speaks. It's always been obvious that he's not a United States native and moved to New Orleans from another country, as Wiseau tends to deflect the question by saying he's American now and proud of it. But confusion about just how in denial he is about his almost certainly European heritage has arisen due to his refusal to directly say for certain where he was born. Recently, though, he has loosened up on this. He surprised James Franco, again on Jimmy Kimmel, when he finally came out and said he was from Europe originally. But there's still plenty of mystery there. He was hammered about this hard on a radio program in 2014, Sam Roberts' Friday show on Sirius XM, where he outright refused to explain why he wouldn't divulge his birthplace. There's equal mystery surrounding the Tick, where he comes from, how old he is, and what he did before he came to the city and started fighting crime, with a major notable difference. The Tick isn't hiding that information, as far as anyone can tell, he just doesn't know either. That's handled a little differently between iterations, though. For instance, Patrick Warburton's Tick seems so oblivious to the point that he probably suffered some kind of head trauma and maybe just has amnesia. Whereas Peter Serafinowicz's Tick, in the Amazon series, isn't so brain-dead and is potentially dubious. He might be doing precisely what Wiseau does in creating a quagmire out of himself intentionally. Perhaps the biggest mystery of all about Tommy Wiseau is where he gets all his money. The Room cost $6 million to make, and he paid for the entire production, as he would say, no problem, out of his own pocket. He did have his own clothing business prior to that, and it's a company surprisingly few people are familiar with given how wealthy it apparently made him. This is where he and the Tick diverge entirely in practical consideration, but are exactly the same in attitude and approach. The Tick is always broke because he doesn't have a job and selflessly fights crime with no thought to where his next meal is coming from. I mean, he totally mooches off his friend Arthur for a roof over his head, but he's super grateful, as the animated series version expresses in the episode Heroes, as he's lamenting the kidnapping of his sidekick. Arthur lets Tick sleep on his couch without paying rent, always has crunchy cereal in the pantry, and he's oh so tidy. And I get the sense that the Tick doesn't fully grasp basic economical concepts or has any sense of where people get their money, as evidenced by another animated series episode, The Tick vs. Arthur's Bank Account, where, as the title suggests, the Tick maxes out Arthur's credit cards to upgrade their crime-fighting apparatus. Like Tommy Wiseau, he usually means well, but he's far from responsible about it. Wiseau is the one in his dynamic duo to let his friend sleep on his couch without paying rent, and he spends frivolously like the Tick, but can somehow afford it. I guess his money is like the Tick's superpowers. I have no idea how either possess it, and it's the only way they're able to accomplish their goals. I swear, were The Disaster Artist a pure work of fiction, dreamed up in the mind of some writer from whole cloth, it wouldn't be remotely believable, and Wiseau's convenient and unexplained fortune would read really lazy in the context of a world that otherwise follows the same rules as our own, unlike the Tick's. It's nearly as strange as Tick's unexplained powers and costume he claims isn't really a costume at all, but it's all actually true. Where they're completely aligned in their attitudes about money is in how disposable they find it whenever it's necessary in pursuing their dreams. They're happy living modest, Spartan lives and only lose their frugality when it's about their singular obsession. Tick has no possessions, besides his crime-fighting Viewmaster in the comics, and again, that's still, hilariously, something he only has to aid him in his war on crime. He has no wardrobe because his one costume is all he needs, which again, most versions swear is what he was born in, and he's content living in an apartment he barely fits in and without a proper bed. Wiseau owns at least one building and an apartment, but he doesn't live grandiosely. He also only seems to wear one outfit, though he has never, as far as I'm aware, claimed it's his birthday suit. But despite their situations, both Wiseau and the Tick go all out when their calling demands it. One of the biggest similarities that struck me watching The Disaster Artist is how possessive both men are of their sidekicks. Once they latch on to a best friend, they each thrust him full force into the deep end of their proverbial swimming pools. Quickly, it's Tommy or Tick's world, and Greg or Arthur are just living in it. In both cases, a close family member is understandably concerned about the company her loved one is keeping and the impulsive actions this new influence is leading to. In The Disaster Artist, it's Greg's mother, and in various incarnations of The Tick, it's Arthur's sister Dot, and in the Patrick Warburton series, also his mother. Both have difficulty understanding that the friendship isn't the same as a marriage, and expect their friends to spend every waking hour with them. Each genuinely loves and cares for his friend, but that friendship is too closely intertwined with his obsession, such that if anything his friend does or even considers doing appears to threaten his dream, he becomes unreasonably jealous, demanding, and guilt-trippy. And the biggest source of tension, spread to the point of snapping, is naturally over a woman. Tick is always threatened by Arthur's pursuit of female companionship. He assumes he's invited whenever Arthur is going on a date, perhaps because he doesn't grasp the concept that friendship isn't customarily Siamese, or perhaps because he can't control his urge to act selfishly in his feelings of abandonment. But he really panics when he's afraid he's not losing just his friend, but his sidekick, like in the animated series when Arthur starts dating Carmelita and Tick desperately replaces him with a plank of wood he crudely nails appendages to and draws a face on. Tommy Wiseau does exactly the same thing. Well, he doesn't make a little wooden boy and recast it as Mark in the movie, but in The Disaster Artist, Tommy acts almost as betrayed as his Johnny character when Mark gets a girlfriend and unfairly forces him to completely prioritize their film project over her until she leaves him. Wiseau and the Tick are both awkward and somewhat immature around girls, but while Tick doesn't have the time or interest in them romantically because they would get in the way of his destiny, and he's written in every story I've watched or read as totally asexual, he isn't the womanizer Wiseau often comes off as. Again, Wiseau's apparent hostility, or at least distrust of women, could likely be traced back to a background he certainly remembers if we had all the information, while Tick's is because of a more genuinely childlike understanding of the world. The Patrick Warburton Tick is completely mystified by anything related to sex, while Wiseau writes about it a lot in his movie, though he certainly doesn't present it or relationships in a realistic or remotely recognizable way. There's a lot of speculation that Wiseau hadn't been with a woman before he made The Room, mostly due to the odd angle he chose to position himself in during the sex scene. Excuse me, Mr. Wiseau, the love scene. I kinda rather doubt that. I think it's more likely he was nervous filming that scene, despite having written it, and was too uncomfortable to get in any more of an intimate position with an actress, considering how many takes, according to Sestero and the Disaster Artist film, he took to even remember his lines in the famous "I did not hit her, oh hi Mark" scene. Still, he's like the Tick in that he has a very superficial understanding and expectations about adult relationships. The thing that most ties them together for me is their general sense of detachment. They live in their own worlds and aren't easily persuaded by facts or logic when those things contradict their understanding of how things are supposed to work. They both tend to fall into denial when reality clearly doesn't match their perceptions, like Wiseau's insisting that he's younger than he possibly can be, or the Tick's refusal to accept that there is no Santa Claus in The Tick Loves Santa, although he turned out to be right about that, but not because he had any real reason to believe in Santa. That stubbornness is vital to their success, but it also brings them reputations of being a tine short of a full comb. Wiseau tends to rewrite his own history, like sometimes acting as though The Room was made with an intentional comic sensibility, while the Tick just sticks to his guns until he knows for sure he can keep playing superhero without this new truth ruining that for him. And their unique perceptions lead to a whole dialect of the English language that is all their own, replete with Tickisms or Tommyisms only they might have conceived of. They both act as though the way they speak is totally normal, and they seem oblivious to the eyebrows raised in most rooms they're in. They each use phrases as if they're already part of the standard lexicon that no one else has ever said. With Wiseau, you get vivid turns of phrase like, keep your comments in your pockets. The Tick gives us nuggets like wicked slick and don't count your weasels before they pop. So which Tick is Tommy Wiseau most like? After all, each of the 4 iterations is a little different. The animated version is a little too wholesome and is too genuinely innocent. The comic version is too much of a wild card and is crazy enough to start his series in a mental institution. Wiseau isn't deranged or dangerous. So far, the Amazon Tick falls somewhere between the animated and comic versions in the sanity and recklessness department, and Patrick Warburton's Tick is the most bumbling, confused, and out of sorts. I think Wiseau is maybe somewhere between Warburton and Serafinowicz's Ticks, and maybe more toward the Warburton side. His nonsensical and awkward reactions in conversation are more like Warburton than anything, but he's more focused and prepared in his plans than Warburton's Tick. Tommy Wiseau is a guy who would not allow anyone or anything to define him, or to tell him what he couldn't do. He did what he wanted despite the odds, and despite doubt all around him. He let his passion for his self-proclaimed calling to guide him in all things, and he's lived his life on his own terms ever since. He was so desperate to be a part of a world he didn't fit into that he broke the rules and got there in the most unlikely of ways. And despite setbacks and occasional self-doubt, he never stopped being anything but himself, all the while preaching peace and brotherhood. The guy is the Tick. Oh, and I almost forgot. There's one more thing Tommy Wiseau has in common with the Tick. They both have a strange fascination with spoons.
Spoon!
I don't get it.